just let you sit there and I sit with you to do just that. To bathe in the light and the love of God. To know that you're forgiven no matter what. That God is hopelessly in love with the dream of each and every one of us. And that we should be ministering to one another and loving one another and being present to that love. That's the only goal of life. That, my sisters and brothers, is the only thing you take with you. And it would be a little disingenuous of us in this, the end of the liturgical year, as this Sunday is the last Sunday that you will hear the Gospel of Mark for 2 years. We celebrate, the church has a cyclical notion of time and liturgical time. Our year is ending in the next couple of weeks, but this is the last time you'll hear Mark. We have 3 cycles of the Synoptic Gospels. This year we've celebrated under Mark, and in Mark, as with all of the Synoptic Gospels, we are invited to hear this version of the end times. And the end times are represented by this apocalyptic moment that is described on the lips of Jesus from the communities that were in tremendous turmoil. 30, 40, 50 years after Jesus' ascension into heaven, the community was always trying to understand itself. What does this Jesus moment mean for you and me as a community? These apocalyptic moments you would think would be, if you're following a structure of a story, the end comes at the end. But this ending comes when Jesus arrives at the end of his journey to Jerusalem. And it comes before his suffering, death, and resurrection. The resurrection, my sisters and brothers, is not the end. That the love that you and I celebrate in our lives, on the love of the shoulders that we stand on, of all the relatives and all the DNA, if you will, of all of the people who have loved you to this moment, is being celebrated and causing you and calling you to celebrate that love. So it is in that spirit that we come and recognize that each and every one of us will come physically to an end. Amen? And we as people, especially in the United States, the culture, well, I don't want to beat up on you all because I do have an American passport, but I also have my Irish passport just in case. But this culture does a terrible disservice to humanity when it comes to how we are in our humanity. I was at a talk given by Elizabeth Johnson, who's a great female theologian in the Catholic Church at Fordham. She invites us to look at Jesus Christ as representing deep incarnation. In other words, it's not just the incarnation, that Jesus Christ came for all of the people of the earth that was, that is, and will come. What she's suggesting is that deep incarnation is that Christ came to save all of creation. And therefore we have a responsibility for owning all of our lives and responsible for all of creation. And in that spirit, we're invited to deal with reality. As you look around the little ofrendas, has anybody seen the movie Coco? Hands up if you've seen the movie Coco. Keep your hands up. If you did not cry at that movie, take your hand down. You didn't cry? You are a strange woman, I'm just saying right now. Are you serious? Well, I wasn't talking about your daughter, I'm talking about you. You didn't cry? Sister, we need to go to confession after this. She's trying to destroy my point. The point is that most of us who are normal, most of us cry at that movie. Because the wonderful tradition of Catholicism in the Latin tradition is that it embraces reality. It's kind of, one of my priest friends the other night said, who's the pastor down at St. Leander's, he said, it's very funny. He said, on All Saints' Day, the gringos all show up and the church is full. And then on All Souls' Day, all of the Latinos show up and all of the gringos don't show up. And it's kind of interesting because our culture celebrates in different ways. The Dias de los Muertos, the little ofrendas that are around remind us of who we are, of the people that we have loved. I look at my own mother and father and my brothers down there, and a certain mother in the choir brought this picture in of her beautiful son a couple of years ago, who was driving from Seattle and was tired and fell asleep at the wheel. And, you know, it tells you that what we have, this gift of life, is incredibly fragile. And no matter how much we all try to run away from that reality, we're invited to live in that reality. When we look up at the saints this week, the bishops of the United States took about 5 mostly African-American possibilities for sainthood. The main one that we're interested in is Thea Bowman. But what I hate about these pictures is we put these halos around them, and we put them up on pedestals, and we forget that they're human beings that lived, who got cut and bled, who cried and laughed, and do all of the things that we do. The invitation of the gospel today is not to look for the trumpet. The invitation is not to look at the tribulations. The invitation isn't to wait on that thing over there. The invitation of the gospel is to read the signs of the times and listen for the voice of Christ in the ordinary little moments of our lives. Not the big things, the little moments of our lives. And that's the invitation that we're invited to do today. So I think it's a little disingenuous on my part, on ours as a community, not to look into the heart of grieving. What use is faith if you do not look at the real things of our lives? We're invited, as we end the church's year, to look at end times. So doesn't it make sense not to look at this, or to look at it because it's the right thing to do? Yes? Oh, okay, really? You don't want to go here with me? You're all trying to be countercultural. I think the great thing about Mexican culture and Irish culture, just to raise up our own, is we kind of embrace it. When somebody, it's interesting, I've watched this my whole life as young, when somebody dies, the neighbors and the relatives, and we have big families, Irish Catholics, and so you come in, the body is, the remains are brought up and put on their bed. There's a white linen put out. There's a white linen cloth put over the mirror because they don't want the ghost or the spirit of the person caught in the mirror. Don't ask, this is what they do. They light the candles, they put up the crucifix, and they open the window because the spirit can't get out if the window's closed. Don't ask. It's all part of it. And everybody comes in and food appears from everywhere. Chairs appear from everywhere. And the community comes together and may get a little drunk and tell stories of why and who and where. You know, the worst thing when my grandmother died was they all come in and they said, "Oh, God bless us and save us. Look at Mary Jane lying there. Sure, she's never looked as well in all her life." I'm like, I was 14 or 15, but I knew that wasn't right because I saw her looking better in her life. But she would have done the same thing. It's this idea that you and I, to the extent that we love someone, a partner, someone we've walked the journey of life, to the extent that you and I in love, we are going to hurt. We are like God. We are hardwired to cry out in pain and in suffering, and our bodies are meant to do that. And you know what a lot of us do? We try to circumvent that pain because our culture gives you 3 days off because you got to get back to work because you better get over it in 3 days. But some of the cultures give a whole year to wear black and do all sorts of stuff. But we're here. And so they invite other people, anesthetize the experience to drink. Or they anesthetize the situation. Shopping. Get that credit card out and let's go shopping because I'm going to feel good for a minute. Some of it's sex, some of it's drugs. Pick your poison. You cannot run away from grief. It is part of who you are. And another thing is, people of God, do not tell people stupid things because you are uncomfortable. Don't do that. If a woman is standing who's had a miscarriage or loses a child and you come up to her and you're all like, oh, I'm so sorry, you have a little angel in heaven. Well, you know what? That woman does not want to hear she has an angel in heaven. What she wants is that child in her arms, alive and well. Don't say things that are silly. It's much better, if you learn anything today, don't say stupid things to people. And be conscious of your own humanity. There are 5 stages in grieving. Now, I come from a family that should have been born in Mexico or Latin or the south of Europe somewhere, Italy or somewhere, because my grandmother was the most warm, affectionate grandmother type that you could have. I just thought that was the norm. Everybody kissed, everybody embraced. We didn't know that we were different from all Irish people. And on the day that we lost my father when he took his own life, we all had to fly from some other part of the world. My sister and I were here in San Francisco. My brother lives in Sweden, and one of my brothers that lives at home happened to be on a golfing thing in Spain. So when we got to the airport, all our flights seemed to come in at the same time. And my one brother is standing there waiting with a whole bunch of relatives to take us home. When we got off the flight, the pain and the anticipation of meeting was, I can't even describe you the white hot pain of where we were going and how it was. But all the relatives were trying to control the situation. And when my sister and I met my 2 brothers coming off the other flights, and we got my brother Gerald, who's gone home to heaven also, when we got together and the 5 of us held one another, all bets were off. The whole airport would have felt the roaring and the crying and the emotion, and everybody said, oh, stop, people will be watching, and who the hell cares about anybody else? We just stood back and left us alone because we needed to feel that pain and that suffering, and we needed one another. And we did what we do as a family. We cried and we yelled, and then we were done. Let's go home. Let's go see what's going on. So the first thing of the stages of grief, I want to say this to you. The stages of grief are a load of crap, right? Kubler-Ross brought about, and her understanding was dealing with cancer patients. And it has been taken a little bit further to deal with grief of loss. There are no 2 people in this world grieve the same way. They just don't. You could go through all of these 5 stages in 1 hour, in 1 week, and nobody can tell you how to grieve. You just have to honor how you are, but it gives us a little way how to talk about it. And one of the first things is you deny that this is happening. The whole flight from San Francisco, I kept crying and saying, this is not happening. This cannot be. This happens to somebody else's family. This is not happening in our family. So you get into this whole denial thing. But it helps you get through the moments of whatever pain and suffering you're going through. You need the denial. It's okay to be in denial. The next part is anger. My sisters and brothers, God is big enough to take your anger. Amen? He made us in his image and likeness. It's what you do with the anger that's important. Anger is just a feeling. You could be angry at the person who's gone. You could be angry at yourself. You could be angry about the thing that you last said. You could be angry about a whole lot of things. But my sister and brothers, it's okay. It's a good thing. It's about how we are with one another. Amen? So be okay with that. And it also makes a little bit of a difference of the type of relationship you had with the person that is gone. Like if the last time you saw them and you had a big fight, you can't tend to focus in on that instead of thinking maybe the 35 or 40 years that you had them and loved them. It's a big picture invitation. The other thing is that we bargain. I don't know how many times in the different moments, like within the short period of time, I lost my mother and my brother within 6 months. And I was like, God, what are you doing? Like, can this not be this way? Can you not, like a couple of weeks ago, I bargained with God to win the lottery, the $1 billion. And I told God that I was going to pay off the cathedral and fix the whole diocese, but half of it was coming to me and my family. That sort of bargaining, when you work, whether you're bargaining with life, when you're bargaining with this moment, it is so painful, you want it not to be true. And so it is an ordinary part of the process. Depression is a natural part of the process. That when you're walking, and it can be in a whole range of things, from a walk of life to just feeling a dullness, right to extreme depression. My sisters and brothers, when that comes along, look out for your community. Reach out to the people that love you. Reach out to the medical and the professionals and those that can take care of you. But do not get into the whole drugs thing or the happy pills or become dependent on that. That can take you away from legitimate. But when you're really in pain, look out to your church community or any community. This issue of grief is not, I repeat, not a Catholic thing, right? I remember when I did the grief group at Christ the King the first time. I was just ordained, and the people were coming, and this man who lived on the street, the night before, I had 45 people signed up for this grief group. And this Presbyterian man from down the street says, Father, I'm not Catholic, but 2 nights ago my daughter committed suicide. Can I come to your grief group? What do you think I said? Yes, you could come. People came, and I remember the group, one of our nuns, she was 80 at the time, and she says to me, Father Aidan, how could you sit in a room with 50 people crying? And I said, because I've been there. I've cried. When I go home to Ireland, morning, noon, and night on the 24-hour clock, I pull into our town, I take the first ride up into the cemetery beside the church, I go to the top of the cemetery where my mother and father and my brother are buried, and I say my prayers, and I cry, and I don't care, because I'm there on my own with them all. And then I pass everybody else who's related to me. Keep in mind, 18 aunts and uncles, 47 cousins. You can imagine there's a lot of people in there. And I'd be running around the graveyard in the midnight, but I always come down to the bottom by the gate. Before my grandmother died, she said to me, son, we were there one day visiting my grandpa's grave. She says, son, you know why I picked this particular spot by the gate? And I said, no, Granny, I don't. She says, oh, when the trumpet blows, I don't want to be crushed when they're getting out the gate. I'm like, okay, Granny, that makes sense. And when I go to her grave, I'm the oldest of most of the grandchildren, and there just was a bond, because my father almost lost his life as a child. My dad, his name is Joseph, and she just loved on my dad, and I'm the oldest, so I got that love. And so that's all part of the journey. Depression can come into your life. Get help if you need it. The last part is acceptance. And you know what? I have to tell you, I don't think I ever accept totally the reality And I'll tell you, when I was at home last year, I said Mass, celebrated Mass in my home parish. And after the Mass, a couple invited me to go for a cup of coffee. And they're the same age as my parents. And I was sitting there, and my best friend, who was a priest for a while and then met the love of his life and got married, so he served for a number of years, Kieran. And so Kieran's mother and father are sitting there. And you know the really horrible thought I had in my mind? Why are these two sitting here and my parents are lying out in the graveyard? And then I felt guilty about thinking about that. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell should be in the graveyard and my parents should be here. You know, it can all be very strange and difficult. But the invitation is to read the signs of the times and be centered in ourselves. Last Christmas, I lost 3 aunts and an uncle over the Christmas period. Now I am not an overly pious person. I'm not a holy Joe type. Okay, you're a priest, and you're supposed to be. But anyway, I remember I had the flu. I had a big bottle of Irish whiskey on one side. I had tissues in the middle, and I had NyQuil on the other side. And I'm sitting up in bed feeling just about as lonely as that house used to have 4 priests. I was on my own. And I thought to myself, God, can it get any worse than this? And the next thing I heard this voice say, Aidan, you got this. You have the roadmap since you were a little boy, serving masses and funerals from you're 7 years old. I have been with you the whole time. And our tradition, and all the love of our Catholic tradition, and all the love of the traditions, and God didn't say all of that. I was thinking that he was saying that, and that's what he meant. You ever interpret what God is saying? Do you ever interpret what God is saying? Well, I was interpreting in my way. And the way that I love to look at all of this is we need to integrate it into our lives. God was saying, you have this because you have the roadmap of how to deal with it. Somehow or another, if from you're a little child and you lose that little dog and you lose somebody, you have to do your grief work. You have to do it all the way along, and you can't let your family hold you back. I know one woman at one grief group gave a talk. She was 3, and she lost her mom, and she was an only child, and her father, her words, was a horrible alcoholic, and he couldn't deal with feelings. And so she wasn't let be seen. She wasn't allowed to approach the casket. She was just told, don't cry. And when it came to 9/11 and she lost her own husband and her only daughter, she remembers when her daughter started to cry, out of anger, she turned to her daughter and says, don't cry. And then she caught herself. She realized that she was transmitting the horrible way that her family had dealt with grief. You must let yourself grieve in the most human and loving way, in your time. And the way that this is most celebrated, reading the signs of the times, I think, is in the movie Coco. It's just as beautiful. Yes, it's a child's thing, but it is just so beautiful in the way it integrates our reality of all of these people that have loved us, all of these saints and all of the unknown saints, and all of the people who have brought us to this minute. They are loving on us. And in Coco, you all know the story. I was going to get a slap after the last Mass because I told the whole story of Coco. And one woman comes and says, Father, you just ruined it for me. I said, well, okay, I'm sorry. So I'm not going to tell you that story. But what Coco does for us in the Mexican Latino tradition of the ofrenda and the remembering is that we have to have a healthy appreciation. Because of all of those who loved us, they went through the same thing. They know what it is to continue to love us. They embrace us. And this reality is part and parcel of who we are. A number of years ago, I wouldn't have been able to preach this homily because Kubler-Ross wouldn't have existed. And cancer understanding and the medical profession was not a thing. And so in every age, We are invited to look at the end times, but not focus on them. We're not looking for big trumpets. We know life is fragile, we know it's precious, and we need to get on with the business of being supported in Christ and loved in our deep incarnation, in our loving presence to one another, and to be family and to remember. And so we're going to listen to the song from Coco of Remember Me. Let us all stand together as the lights come on and that we remember that we are all part of one great big family. We're called to read the signs of the times in every age, and we're called to be ready and loving and caring and kind. So it is in that spirit of love that we offer our prayers and petitions.